Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a video covering 3 new budget IEMs and where I'm ranking them on my wallhack certified tier list. I have the OoopusX's Op.24. The thing that's interesting about this 2DD 4BA set is it does have a kind of turntable here where you can swap between 2 different tunings. However, the 2 different tunings are really not that different enough in the areas I need them to be. Default cable is a recessed 2-pin, and I am not a fan of the default cable. All IEMs in this video were tested with the same cable, the Triple and Moonshadow, and I'll leave that here on the table. I have the Kefine Quatio. This is the most expensive set in the video. It's 2 DDs, 2 BAs, and then the Simgot EG280 is 1 DD, 1 planar. And the Kefine Quatio does have the nicest cable in the box. It is one that has an interchangeable termination, which is nice. And just a nice addition to a budget-ended IEM. Now, getting the cables out of the way, again, one thing I will say is that these IEMs are very different for very different reasons. The OoopusX's Op.24 I will start with for the ranking here, but I do just want to throw out there that the ranking for IEMs on my competitive gaming list, it is not about just imaging and where things are placed in the space and can I hear accurately that something's coming from my left, something's coming in front of me, something's coming behind me. Ayo. No, that is not what it is about. It is about a multitude of and a variety of things, and most importantly is, in my opinion, separation and layering. If something is not coming through the mix when I need it to, in a 5v5 scenario in a tag shooter, or in a 3v3 scenario in a battle royale, and again, then third parties added in, fourth parties coming in, the imaging doesn't matter. So I need an IEM to separate and layer appropriately. Just so you guys know, when I talk about layering in Valorant, that would mean the same audio cue being able to be parsed out from the same audio cue. So if I have 2 people behind a wall that are in close vicinity and both of them are shooting a Vandal, I need to be able to hear exactly where each of those is coming from. I don't want a mashed potato effect where I just hear 2 things in a general vicinity. If a team is pushing a site from behind a wall, I want to be able to make out the different footsteps if I'm going to be playing aggressive, take an angle, and be able to hear separately where those people are behind a wall. So that's kind of what we get into with layering. Now, separation is if somebody is shooting a Vandal or if I'm shooting a Vandal, can I hear other things at all that are happening within the mix? And when you add third parties, fourth parties in a battle royale, with a lot of these things going on, does it just provide too much occlusion for nothing to be heard within the space? So kind of similar camp, but different in the same right. Now, general imaging is, of course, very important. And I think one of the important aspects of imaging in these games is verticality and depth perception. Depth perception being within a line in front of me, do I hear precisely how far in terms of yardage somebody is in front of me? And that is an area on these IEMs that is definitely impacted on some as opposed to others. You can see that all of these things coalesce into a general experience where I need to be able to hear these things and hear these things accurately for 1, my crosshair placement, 2, to know how aggressive I can play, 3, to be able to keep track in my mind despite having my teammates next to me doing things as well, be able to keep track in my mind what the most urgent threat is. So when I am in a master's lobby in Apex, I am not dropping the ball and exposing myself and not micromanaging my health as much as I should be. And I think it's important to have testing in those experiences, in those master's ranked lobbies, to be able to provide you enough information in those scenarios. Now, the Oopus, I will start with these. So the Oopus that you guys can see on the graph, there is this massive elevation in that 3 to 4K region. And unfortunately, what that does is it brings out gunfire, brings out certain things to such a great emphasis. In Apex, kicking in a door is just so massively emphasized that 1, it is actually very fatiguing because of how shouty it is, but 2, it actually is occluding other things in the mix. So add thermites into the mix, add ultimates and abilities into the mix, plus gunfire, it is like a flashbang where you just cannot hear anything that is happening around you. The occlusive effect of just gunfire from your perspective with how elevated that range is makes these something that I just can't really recommend for Apex Legends. And For the imaging in general, the imaging is actually not bad. The depth perception is actually a little bit better than the Simgot EG280. But the issue is if I cannot hear anything to a great extent in even a 1v1, yet alone a 1v2 or a 1v3, it's just not going to get a high recommendation. So for Apex Legends, I would give these a C+. And again, that is in great part due to the massive emphasis, massive elevation, the lack of layering and separation when some of the most prevalent things are happening in the game, such as gunfire, ultimates, abilities. But gunfire, most importantly, is just so shouty, so prevalent on both tunings, by the way. It does not matter. It's just so overly elevated on either tuning. I just cannot recommend them. Now, when we move to Valorant, these actually don't perform that badly in Valorant. When you take them into a deathmatch, the imaging, the depth perception, again, actually not that bad at all. But when you take them into a team scenario, so you can't just test these in a team deathmatch, but taking them into a team scenario, the layering falls off from people behind a building. So if I'm about to take an angle, again, when there's two sets of footsteps, the layering turns into a bit of a mashed potato effect, and you're just not hearing with great detail the imaging of where each of those is. It blends just a little bit. I find the blending to actually be a little bit worse on the Simgot EG280. But when you are turning, it's just not very accurately demarcated in terms of how that audio is being presented. Now, the gunfire, I actually do not find shouty or fatiguing on the OoopusX Op.24. But what is abilities. For instance, Reyna, and if I'm sucking up an orb, is just so overwhelming. Other abilities like flashbangs, concussive grenades, etc., on a multitude of characters is just so massively elevated when you are flashbanged. It's very hard and just very difficult to not be kind of stunned by it because of how elevated it is. That plus the separation is just not that great on this set in Valorant either. I actually don't find the experience to be bad. I would just place it in Valorant a little bit higher than I would in Apex at a B-. And primarily it's because I think a big issue when you start talking about tac shooters is that layering. I mean, it just makes all the difference in the world, being able to hear multiple things and separate out multiple things as they are pushing a site, or as you are pushing a site with your team. You need to be able to hear things. But again, in big team fights with a lot of abilities going off, think flashbang in your ears, and you just can't really make out anything. So again, a B- for Valorant. Now, because the set isn't really scoring all that great in two of the big titles, I would not have gone on and tested these in CS2 or another title like Call of Duty. When we move over and transition to the Simgot, now the Simgot is actually fairly nice. The EG280, when you first take these into Deathmatch and Valorant, they almost sound like they would be a B+ because of its Harman 2019 curve. It actually does elevate two things. The footsteps on the low end are elevated. The footsteps on the upper region are actually elevated as well. And gunfire is elevated. So piercing through the map and hearing with great emphasis and detail are the things you want to hear: the footsteps, the gunfire, etc. Things sound as though they separate and layer fairly well in a deathmatch, but when you start taking it into a team scenario like team deathmatch or 5v5s, you begin to pick up the issue of that mashed potato effect of multiple people being behind a wall. You just can't quite make out the footsteps and demarcate each of those from behind a wall. Another thing is the tactility of when somebody's about to come out from behind a wall from horizontal imaging actually doesn't sound as good as the OP24. And I wish it was just a little bit more tactile, more pungent of a hit when somebody is exactly about to come out from behind a wall. But most importantly, just that issue with separation and or layering, I should say. And as multiple things are going on at the same time, and there's a lot of shooting in team deathmatch or in 5v5s, you begin to really pick up an issue with separation as well. You begin to not hear things that are going on when there's a lot of gunfire. Gunfire is a little bit more elevated, and a little bit more elevated even as it sounds on the Kefine Quatio. So a very nice balance set. The space feels kind of clean and airy. It's just when things start going on, it takes a little bit of a hit. And I would rank these around a B- for Valorant. When we take the Simgot EG280 into Apex, it actually performs fairly well. Although I will say, again, the gunfire is not as elevated as the OP24, but still a little bit elevated. And in fights, you are losing out on separation and layering. You begin to lose, like when there are smokes going off, ultimates going off, grenades going off, thermites, etc. You lose out a lot on the element of separation. You just don't hear things creeping up on you as much as you should, especially when there is gunfire from your perspective. You lose out on the slides, the taps, the climbs. And it's one of those IEMs where, like, although the imaging sounds generally good, it's one of those where, like, wow, where did this guy come from? Where was the audio on that? You find yourself saying that a little bit too much. I will say as well that depth perception takes a hit on these both in Valorant and in Apex Legends. The depth perception in a line of like somebody shooting in a distance, you just don't get this very accurate read of where that guy is along a path. You know it's in front of you and you know like a general distance, but it's not overtly accurate. Now in Apex, in comparison to Valorant, it's even more important because I find that when somebody is shooting me from elevation or from below me, I get this like general vicinity as I'm whipping my crosshair to a general direction, but it's not very accurate with how high somebody is or how low somebody is. It's pretty accurate, but just not as accurate as something like the Kefine Quatio. Now, for Apex Legends, because of the hit on separation, layering, depth perception, and again, depth perception, I did find to be, again, it's fairly good. The things that get onto the wallhack certified tier list, again, guys, are generally good for gaming, but once you start getting from like a B- to a B+, you really notice a lot of differences in terms of their playability in a multitude of titles. And I would give the Simgot a B- in Apex and Valorant. Now, the Kefine Quatio is by far, hands down, one of the best IEMs that I've heard to date up through that $130 price range. The Kefine Quatio is exceptionally good in Valorant. You swap to this from these two sets, and the one thing that you really begin to notice instantaneously is that difference in that depth read. Things that are at a distance along the path in front of you just hit so much more accurately in your brain. It really makes a world of a difference in terms of that level of holographic imaging. I do find the things to just feel more accurate within the space in terms of imaging all around me, and there's a more tactile feel of when somebody's about to cross that wall and behind a threshold. That issue of layering of multiple people behind a wall really doesn't make is a massive difference on these and is really not an issue in Valorant. So layering, separation, vastly improved from these two sets. General imaging and holographic feel in terms of depth perception, really nice. The set does have a little bit of warmth to it. So things in the space could feel ever so slightly cleaner, clearer. But overall, the bass on this has more rumble. And despite that, it has more rumble, more technicality than these other two sets. I still find the separation and the layering to be better than these other two sets. So not only is it a little bit warmer, a little bit more fun, it's also better competitively speaking as well in terms of general imaging, separation, and layering. Now, the only issue on these is that when there is a lot, and I mean a lot happening, maybe a little bit of a hit when there are things like an operator, a vandal, more on that rumbly side, a little hit in separation and layering in Valorant, but I would give these a B+, which is a solid score. I think these are really, really good in Valorant. Just a really nice tactile holographic imaging feel to these and great presentation within the space. When we transition to Call of Duty, I do find that they handle very well on the headphone mix. They worked better on headphone than the Treyarch mix, and in CS2 as well, despite this extra added element of warmth. I actually still find the lighter things to be pretty elevated as well. So like slides in COD, the lighter taps in CS2 still coming through very nicely. And again, with great depth perception and great imaging. So very good in Call of Duty and CS2. I would say in COD, when there's a lot going on, mortar strikes, airstrikes, etc., you lose out a little bit on the lighter end with the slides, the taps, people coming up zip lines, etc. But the imaging, the depth perception, very good, and separation and layering still handle very well as well. And I would say like B bordering B+ for COD and CS2 as well. CS2, I just wish like some of the lighter things came through a little bit more, but overall a very good presentation in CS2. I do find like there's really like a tight, defined balance in CS2. I want the space to be like clean, clear, and open with great draw on some of the lighter things from a distance, but not like too bright where the gunfire is just becomes shouty, and when you're spraying an AK, it causes occlusion. This doesn't do that. I think it's like closer in CS2 to the score of Valorant. I would say like for CS2, B plus bordering a B is where I would put these. COD, B bordering B plus. Now, when we get to Apex Legends on the Kefine Quatio, these are just, again, like when you swap to these, you hear that depth perception, that imaging so much better than these other two sets that I would definitely recommend paying a little bit more and getting the Kefine Quatio. Like gunfire at a distance, the verticality, the depth perception of where exactly it's coming from just reads so much cleaner and clearer. When you are in a 3v3 scenario, I find gunfire from my perspective is still kind of like elevated, but not something that feels occlusive or too shouty or something that becomes like deer in the headlights. I still hear the slides, the things happening in game to a very great extent. When you add a little bit more rumble, like thermites, ultimates going off, Bangalore smokes, or you're popping a stim on Octane, like those things cause a little bit of occlusion, a little bit of issues with layering and things like that. I do think like a little bit cleaner and clearer open in the space in Apex does add quite a bit of a benefit in hearing a lot of those things. And maybe instead of and maybe if we could have reduced the gunfire ever so slightly, reduced that rumble ever so slightly, they would definitely score a little bit higher and I think would have worked better in big team fights. But again, in 3v3s and even adding like an element of a third party, still hearing things very well within the space. And again, I would say a B in Apex bordering a B+. So a very strong performance from the Kefine Quatio, and one that just far surpasses the other two sets in the budget range. So really, guys, it's not just about like the imaging and where you're hearing something in the space. There's just so much more of a multitude of factors when you start talking about high-level competitive gameplay. And you really need to have like that situational awareness being very clean for a strong competitive purpose. I think it's one of the things that makes the biggest difference in my personal performance, my personal gameplay. I rely a lot on audio, and when it clicks and it starts working for you, you really notice a difference. And I would urge anyone who really wants to feel that difference, certainly you could try and compare the Kefine Quatio to something like one of these other two sets. But man, it makes a world of a difference. So I will get these all on the wallhack certified tier list. You guys can see where ultimately I will place them. The Kefine Quatio is kind of like bordering between that B and B plus range, but a very good set up through that $130 price mark. And I think I kind of prefer these over the Simgot EM6L even. So a strong showing from Kefine. But keep in mind, if you already own the Delchi AE, that is a very good set as well. One that is a little bit different in terms of its tuning. But I think the performance is pretty much rivaled here between the two. So, keep in mind, if you do want a little bit of a cheaper set, the Kefine Delchi AE is still a very, very strong IEM under $100 if it is still available. That's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope it helped. I hope it helps explain things and the differences. That is going to be it for this one, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.